Okay, Mr. Woolbright, we were talking about your high school days. Tell us about some of the social activities. And did you meet your wife in high school?
No, I never met her until the war.
Okay, tell us first about your high school social activities.
Well, the social life that we had in high school was not really an awful lot, although we had the junior-senior prom that was always an item. And that was, I guess, was when in high school, that was the big social function of the school. But that outside of that, of course, I had my dates as I had, and you know, of course, I don't know whether any of those girls are now. Fact is, when I look at my age, they're probably dead.
What year did you graduate?
1931.
What did you do in the intervening years between high school and the outbreak of World War II?
I went into the carpentry trade, and shall I say, learned my profession there. And that was also had done, shall I say it, odd jobs around, but it was the carpentry business, or the carpentry trade at that time was primarily a summer job, because in the wintertime everything closed down, and there's very little building going on in the wintertime. But I worked in the dredge boats whenever they built that dike around Lake Okeechobee. That was one of Roosevelt's projects, which I think was 33. Let me see, he took office in 33. It's probably 34, maybe 35, because that had been approved by the Republican Congress that was Herbert Hoover's. I mean, yeah, his term as president. They had appropriated or authorized building that dike.
The Hoover dike.
Because that 28 storm was devastating out there. It is known that they killed somewhere around 2,000, 2,200, and there's still a lot of people that are listed as missing that they don't know where they disappeared somewhere.
You were in what, 12 years old, something like that, during the hurricane? Or
Yes.
14 maybe?
No, I was 14 years old.
What do you recall of the hurricane of 28?
Well, I'll have to say not much, because we had a farm in Georgia, and Mother and I were caught up there. Well, Dad was too, when that storm came along. And so I really was not in the 28 hurricane down here. I was in the 26, and I was in the 47, and all the other hurricanes that have been along that has hit this East Coast, lower East Coast.
What do you recall of the 26 hurricane?
Well, that was a terrific amount of rain, and it centered in on Dade County, but that threw us on the strong side of the storm. And we had quite some high winds, and a lot of those boom time houses that had just begun to get built, that wind blew them down just like a house of cards, because you never saw anything thrown together so fast in your life as they were. That they had thrown up a frame structure, 2x4 studs, 24 inches on center, and covered with a type of mesh it was a mesh that had paper laced behind it, and that was nailed up, and they stuccoed on that. Well, of course, that 26 storm blew a lot of them down. The 28 storm took the rest of them.
What are your recollections of those years after the bust, after the stock market crash, and prior to the war? All during the 30s when you were working as a carpenter and a handyman.
Well,
was your father retired by then?
oh yeah, well he had retired from farming, and he didn't farm anymore. Although he went into the raising chickens. We raised broilers and fryers and laying hens, and he had quite a demand for that, you know, from these meat markets. That he would, you know, they'd come out and place an order that they wanted, we'll say 25 fryers or 15 baking hens and things like that, you know, and it just kept him busy. But then that was a 7-day-a-week job too, same as farming. You know, farming is it's the biggest gamble that we've got in this country, because a farmer is the only manufacturer that cannot set a price on his finished product. He has to take what the market will stand.
What about your life during the 30s in Palm Beach County? Tell us some of the highlights.
Well, highlights was, I would have to say, it was working 5-6 days a week, and going out on Saturday night and whooping it up, spending Sunday morning regretting it. But that was basically what it was, you know. We didn't have an awful lot of.
Where did you go to whoop it up?
Oh gosh, it was. I would say that they is probably in between Delray and Boynton. I would say there'd have to be at least 10 gin mills around that you could always find. But usually they was at the Boynton Women's Club they had it, and at the Lake Worth Casino they had it too. It was a public dance on Saturday night, and it cost you either 75 cents or $1 to get into that. But you could go there and dance, you know. Always pick up a dance mate somewhere along there.
You were talking about gin mills. What happened to the gin mills during the Prohibition era?
Well, this was after Prohibition.
Yeah. What about the
Yeah,
earlier
we'll say,
days?
prior to that time, there was no gin mills or blind pigs, as they call them, except one I knew in Briny Breezes, what is now Briny Breezes, or just south of Briny Breezes. There's a little house back up there in the pines, and that was a blind pig. You could go in there and get a drink. But that was always offshore whiskey. It was what one that the bootleggers had brought in. Now that was an interesting thing too on where our house sat on the hill. That hill was 44 feet high above sea level. And we had this big white 2-story house set up there. And during the winter season, at least 3 or 4 mornings a week, as we were sitting and having breakfast, you would hear a plane. And you look out the north window, and here he is. He's not more than 200, maybe 300 feet high. No markings on him at all. And it was a bootlegging plane that's flying in from West End in the Bahamas Islands, going back into one of those sloughs. That is a slough is a place that it held water in the summertime, but they were dry in the wintertime. And he'd run, and my dad one time watched him. This one time he lit in the slough right in back of our house. And Dad went down there to watch him, and he taxied up to one end switched that plane around and begin to throwing bags out. It was counterbrand whiskeys made up in 6 bottles to a bag, padded and all. He threw them out, and then he turned around and he took off. And then he'd fly back to the south of our house. Dad wondered what's going to happen to that. All at once, here come a pickup out of the woods, run up, loaded that stuff on, and took off.
How about the years leading up to the war? You were still working as a carpenter?
Yes, I was. I was working as a carpenter, and well, for a single man, I had a real high draft number for my district, which covered Boynton there. My number was 1,700 and something. So, and the draft had started in September of 40, I think 1940. And I just went down to the draft office, and that section there was in Lake Worth. And went down to that draft office and asked what my position was, and he said, well, the way we're going says it'll probably be May, June, or July that you might get called in. This was in October or November.
Of
And
40?
then I saw in the paper that the Navy was sending through a recruiting boat. It would be docking in West Palm Beach here at the old Pennsylvania, no, not Pennsylvania, but now the hotel that was right down. They had their own dock down in the
George
lake.
Washington? The George Washington?
I think it was a later. That was the same hotel, but I think Dorothy Wilkes took it over later.
That's the George Washington.
And so I just decided to go up and see what they'd offer me, and because they had dropped, the Navy had dropped their recruiting from 4 years to 2 years, and the draft had jumped from 12 months to 18 months. And I thought, well, I'd just soon spend another 6 months in the Navy rather than get into the Army. Because I was in college, I had ROTC training, and I knew what they'd do to me if I got me in the Army. So I went down. Now this was the 2nd of December, 1941. I went down and talked to them, and that morning I had written for a copy of my birth certificate in Jacksonville, and I checked the mail before I drove up there, and there it was. I had that copy in. And I'm telling you that naval officer was the slickest talking man I ever was against. I come out of there a member of the United States Naval Reserve, waiting for a call for active duty. And I says, about how long do you think this will take? He says, I won't turn any of these in until I get to Jacksonville, and then they got to go to the 6th Naval District in Charleston. And I said, time all the paperwork's done, he says, probably be March or April. Well, the Japs hit the 7th of December in 41. I was eating Navy beans and cornbread the 15th of December in 1941. Man, they snatched me in there the fastest you ever saw in your life. God. And of course, I spent, from 2nd of December until February of 46 in the Naval Reserve. And saw active duty in Europe. I was in the invasion of Normandy there at Omaha Beach. And that's where I got my battle star.
What role did you play in the invasion, the Normandy invasion?
Well, I went in as a carpenter's mate. and they put me aboard a ship. It was a fleet tug. Now, that fleet tug was no little boat. It was 210 foot long, and it had a lot of power to it. But I went aboard that ship in Falmouth, England, just prior to the invasion, about, I guess this was somewhere around the last day in May or maybe the first day in June. And what did I see them doing? Taking every stick of wood that ship had on it and taking them ashore. I thought, what the hell am I doing here as a carpenter's mate? But our job was to, in the invasion, was to go in and get those ships that were shot up and in the way and couldn't navigate. We had to go in and get them and bring them out. And if we could salvage them, we did. Made them see where they could get back across the channel into England. If they couldn't, we went out and deep sixed them. We put them on the bottom.
What impact did the war have on our community here?
In fact, on what?
On our community. What impact did the war have on Palm Beach County?
Well, it really gave southeast coast of Florida one heck of a kick towards tourism. Up until the war, we had tourists coming in, but they weren't in big flocks like they are now. But that because the government set up all kinds of camps along this lower east coast of Florida because of the weather. They could operate them year round. And the parents of the boys that were in the Army, because most of them are all Army camps, they would come down to visit them. And they'd see what they. So after the war, they began to flock back down here. And that was really the start of the economic boom that this area has gone through and is still going through. Of course, it's had some fluctuations to it.
I want to go back a second. You mentioned that you went to college, and I guess I misunderstood you. I thought you left high school and became a carpenter. Did you go to college for a while? Where did you go?
Did I go to college for what?
Where did you go to college?
I went to Georgia Tech in Atlanta.
How long were you there?
I was there for a little better than 2 years. I was what they called the co-op department. They had a good co-op system that permit you to work your way through college. We went to school 13 weeks, and we worked 13 weeks. And that was, out of the 52, that was year round. And it took 5 years to get a degree, but then that you could work your way through there, and I was going along pretty well until I guess it was 1939 or 40, after the last quarter there, and I didn't figure that I had enough money to hold me over for the next term, so I decided to drop out and continue to work. And then I got caught up in that, and the war come along, and I never went back and got my degree because in the meantime I had learned my carpentry trade and I liked it. And after the war, I went to work, of course, for several contractors. But I run across one is Ross Watson that had come down here from Virginia. And he took me on and he gave me a good job. So I was a superintendent. And I just stayed into the building business, which I started my own company in 1949.
Tell us how you met your wife.
What's that?
Tell us how you met your wife. Your wife.
Oh, my wife?
How did you meet your wife?
Well, when I was transferred out of my local base at Mayport, up here, at the mouth of the St. Johns River, I was transferred to Lido Beach, New York, was out on Long Island, and that was an embarkation point. Well, then I knew I was going overseas, and of course the Navy and their efficiency, they lost my sea bag, my records, and everything on transporting me from Jacksonville to Long Island. And I was, I guess, let me see, that was in November, and I could say it was sometime in December, late December, before the records ever got started, before I could draw pay. Well, I got a wad of it at that time, but then the little town of Long Beach had a wonderful USO. You could go in there and you could eat 3 meals a day, if your weekend though. They'd even they had you a place where you could spend the night if you wanted to. And my wife was a receptionist there. And of course when I had to register in, where I was from, next of kin and all. And Louise wrote a letter to my mother and told her that he met your son and that he's fine and everything's all right and this, that, and the other. And then I corresponded with her whenever I went overseas. And I came back, we dated, and I decided, well, this is the little girl I want in my life. So I proposed to her to the music of Vincent Lopez in the Hotel Taft in New York City. And it didn't take her long to say yes. But then we married in, and I was released from active duty in September of 1945, and we were married in November 25th of 1945.
What was Louise's last name? What was Louise's last name?
Bisceglia. She's an Italian girl. It's Bisceglia. And she was one of 3 children, but one girl died at a very young age, around 12 or 14 years old, and so she had a brother. That brother still lives on Long Island, in Long Beach out there, where he was born in New York City as well as my wife was too. But
what became of your brothers?
Well, my oldest brother had graduated from Georgia Tech, and he was a engineer, civil engineer with the Florida State Highway Department until he retired. And my brother Sam, he was also a student of Georgia Tech, but then he was caught in the economic conditions of the late 20s. And he had 2 years at Georgia Tech. And he went to work with his uncle, which was an electrician. And he liked the electrical work, and so he started his own company as an electrical contractor. And my brother Lex was, he had several businesses. He had a fish market. He smoked fish. And then he went into answering service. He set up one section. I built a building for him while I was at the trade. But he went into this answering service. And he had that until he decided he would work until he was 70 years old. and he says, I'll get more Social Security pension. Poor devil didn't live out the year. He died when he was 70. But his wife got the pension and all the money that he had. They never had any children.
What was your oldest brother's name again?
Burl.
Burl.
Burl Meredith. My mother's maiden name was Meredith.
So it was Burl, then Sam, then Lex.
Well, Sam was, his real name was William Turner. And Lex was Dr. Alexander.
Okay, so there was the four
There
of
was
you.
four of us boys that were all in the service in World War II. And the only reason they didn't take my oldest brother Burl in is because he was essential. He was working and building airports and ports in Florida here. That is, you know, he was supervising. He was a government employee.
What about your fourth brother? You mentioned three.
Well, that was Pat. That was the youngest one. He went into the Air Force at 18, and he took he was flying these B-17 bombers, and he had 17 missions over Germany. And he and I met one time in London during that time when I was over there. But then, unfortunately, he was a training officer working out of Forbes Air Force Base in Kansas. And the planes that he was flying, training him on, was, I think they were B-52s or B-50s. But they had designed them to where when they took off, because they carried, I'm going to get how many tons? I think it's 100,000 pounds of explosive they would carry. But to get them off of the ground, they devised a system of alcohol and water to shoot into that jet engine at give it an extra boost and kick. Of course, they had four jet engines on each one of those ships. Well, he had this particular morning, they had to set too long on the runway, and that alcohol and water separated enough to the point that when they asked for the boost, he threw water right into the engines. And it didn't make it. He was killed in that accident. That was in 1963.
Okay, we're going to interrupt for just a second and just ask a few more questions, and then we're going to let you go. How's that?
I'm surprised you got me talking this long with nothing but water.